Hey there, folks. Because I'm Carlos podcast number 16. Been a little bit since the last audio episode, so we're going to do another one today. And this one specifically, I want to focus on an interview that actually happened last week. And part of the reason that I didn't make a video or an audio podcast earlier on it is that it wasn't breaking pressing news, but it was still something that I wanted to talk about. It's still something that I thought would be worthwhile discussing a little bit and kind of breaking down. And what I'm referring to is the Josh Luber interview he did on the Sports Card Investor YouTube channel when they did their virtual holiday expo, their little holiday, virtual convention. And amongst a variety of different interviews and panels and things they did, I watched a good chunk of it. But for the most part, I thought a lot of it was just a little bit in the filler side, and it was fine. And I think it's one of those things where if you have a little time and you want to watch a little bit of it, it's fine for what it is. And if you were there for the giveaways, certainly it's worthwhile your time to check it out. But if you're somebody like me who's just interested in various pieces of content, then you're going to kind of key in on certain components of it. And this interview is certainly one of them. Josh Luber, obviously being a big player in the space with his role, kind of as the visionary, executive or whatever you want to call it for Fanatics. And obviously the role that Fanatics is going to have with all their licenses going forward in the hobby. But specifically what I was interested in is that they did have a bit of a long form kind of interview. It lasted over 35 minutes. And in the course of this conversation, I'm going to go over a couple of specific pieces that he mentioned on there. And then I'm also going to include a link to the interview itself because they separated it out as an interview and you can check it out in its entirety unedited. As I go through this, I will play a couple of clips for you, and that'll be what I'm responding to, specifically from the interview, from Josh Luber's perspective. And I do want to credit the Sports Card Investor YouTube channel. Like I said, I will include a link to their video in the description so that you can check it out unedited as they intended it. And also, I do want to credit Jeff Wilson and the rest of the team for putting it together, their virtual convention, and for having the interview and providing the platform for Josh Luber to share some of these thoughts. He has shared certain bits and pieces of it, but this was a couple of very good clips that allow us to kind of get some thoughts into it. One other qualifier that I want to make as well is that, he qualifies it right at the beginning. These are some of the thoughts he's kicking around. This is kind of an extension of the thesis, the 50-page paper that I've described previously on the channel that he did, talking about some of his thoughts on various parts of the hobby. And in addition to that, it's not really a commitment. The beauty of this is that, I will say from Josh Luber's perspective, is that it allows him to put stuff out there and indirectly get feedback from folks on kind of the way he's thinking and some of the thoughts he has without actually committing to anything. Because he can always say back, it's like, I didn't say I was going to do this. I said, this is what I'm thinking about. And then, he's got to cover no matter what. But it's one of those things where it's an interesting opportunity for folks to hear some potential thoughts and some of the thought process behind some of the stuff he's thinking about doing, and then decide for themselves whether they like the idea or not. And that's going to be the focus of this conversation during this particular podcast episode. Now, one more thing I'll say before I go on here and talk about the first point is just simply this. Usually I put it at the end of the episode, but I'm going to do quickly here towards the beginning. If you are checking this out from the YouTube channel, the Because I'm Carlos YouTube channel, then I would really appreciate if you would hit the like button on the video. It's one of those things as we're headed towards the end of the year. I usually don't bother with it too much, but I am trying to slowly increase the engagement on it. I would love to get these videos to get out to more folks as we go along. In 2022, one of my goals is to slowly increase kind of the reach of some of these videos. If you do enjoy or get any value whatsoever about it, hitting the like button is pretty much the easiest and freest way of supporting the channel. If you do think someone would benefit or would appreciate checking out some of the content, you can certainly pass along the link. That helps a lot as well. Both of those are very free ways of helping out the channel. Anyway, so let's get into the Josh Luber interview. What I'm going to do for you first is I'm going to play a little clip, and this clip specifically is going to focus on an interesting topic, and that is the idea of transparency in production numbers, which is kind of a little bit of a hot button topic with folks based on the whole idea about, increasing production from the different manufacturers. So let's get Josh Luber's take on this, and then I'm going to come back and give some thoughts on this as well.
Transparency is everything. And I have this idea, I don't know if it's possible, but I have this idea that we should be transparent into production numbers across the board. We should tell everybody how many of every product that is created. I don't know if that's possible for a lot of different reasons. Sneaker companies do it on some very select shoes, but generally they don't. Trading cards do it for some very select sets, and generally they don't. I think the market is smart enough to handle that information. maybe the initial shock of it, it has some implications, but I think over time the market is smart enough to handle that information, and then it's all there out in the open for people to understand that, hey, this is a high end product, it's premium, there's more chase elements, it's less supply, this is more populous, and it should be on the shelves at Target. And if you do that, if you know the delta between how much is printed of a hobby product versus a retail product, people aren't going to clear off the shelves of that retail product at Target. They're going to let it sit there and let the kid go buy it because they recognize that the value is way more. I should spend my time trying to buy the hobby product or something different, right? Like, the idea is, if you have a holistic strategy, supply and demand across all the products, there should be high-end stuff that sells for big dollars, but there should also be product that is always available for anybody who wants to go buy a pack of cards for $1, for that proverbial kid to go in and walk into Target or Walmart or his local convenience store and buy a pack of cards. And by the way, we want cards everywhere. I want to have cards. People are concerned that hobby shops won't get cards. I want first of all 10 times as many hobby shops, and I want to have trading cards in convenience stores and baseball games, and like, there should be trading cards everywhere. But back to the point, people should know what it is they're looking after. And if it encourages those resellers and the investors to stay away from the stuff that has massive volume, great, let the kid go buy that pen.
Now, as far as takeaways, this is actually probably one of the more interesting little pieces. I've heard elements like this before in terms of that concept, but it was interesting to hear Josh Luber articulate this specific idea. So let's break this down into two parts. First is the idea of providing production runs for entire segments of it. Now, off in the distance, if you put your ear out there out the window, you'll be able to hear off in the distance a bunch of people saying hallelujah and praising the very concept of it, because they've been begging and pleading for this very idea about doing the production runs. Now, as usual, and those of you that have been watching or listening to the channel or this podcast for any period of time would realize that I do enjoy my contrarian opinions. But in this particular case, it's not just for the sake of playing devil's advocate. It's more of just a general question. One important thing that kind of, and it'll play into one of the other points from later on, is that people say they want these things. But the question that I kind of pose is, are you prepared and are you able to take advantage of it if you do? Do you even know how to use the thing if it's given to you? And what I mean by that is this. The idea of getting production runs across the board and being able to see really how much is printed of all these various things sounds good in practice. But I did an episode, I think the very last episode that I recorded was on the idea of some of the difficulties of ascertaining demand. And I made the point that it's actually easier for us to at least extrapolate supply. And that's without us knowing what the actual supply numbers are. Without knowing the production numbers, we can at least guesstimate within a reasonable proximity, if you're willing to do a little bit of math, in order to try to figure out more or less how many boxes are out there, how many potential packs are out there, how much of this product may exist. You can sort of guess. As long as you've got serial numbers and pack ratio odds that are legitimate, then you can kind of work it out. To a certain degree, folks have been able to figure out production runs to within a certain tolerance of a lot of issues for quite some time. And it really hasn't been very impactful on the market as far as that's concerned. Now, one important piece that this kind of plays into, and this is kind of absolutely critical to this whole idea, is in this scenario, we would have the production runs of everything. The high volume stuff, the low volume stuff, and the middle volume stuff. Again, it's a hypothetical. Josh Luber even qualifies it saying, I'm not sure if we can do this. The truth is, yes, you could. The question is, would you want to? It's a cool idea to say out loud, and there's some people would obviously support you in this, but the question is, could the market handle it, quote unquote? He says, I think the market is smart enough. I'm inclined to disagree, but at the same time, even if the market is quote unquote smart enough, the question is, can the market even make something out of those numbers? I'm not saying don't do it. Just to be clear, if you want to do it, by all means, go for it. But my point is, if you're provided with the production numbers to a lot of these products, the question is, going back to that discussion I had about the whole demand thing and the difficulty in trying to figure out what the demand actually is. If I say to you that the production run of this product is 1 million cards, and maybe each card in the production run is printed to 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, let's say 15, 20,000. So here's the question. Is that high? Is that low? Is that about right? Well, the problem is, if you don't know what the demand is, or you don't even have the first clue of what the demand actually is, it's actually completely worthless information. The only thing you can do is compare one product to another and say, well, this product's rarer than that one. This one had a production run of 1 million total cards, and this other one had a production run of 5 million total cards. Therefore, the one with 5 million is worse. Well, I guess to a certain degree, I guess it depends on if the one with 1 million cards is 5 times the price of the 5 million card one, then the demand also adjusts. You got to remember what I said previously about the whole demand thing is that the price point does matter. If I offer you a product that has a production run of 5 million cards and also a different product that has a production run of 1 million cards, and I charge you the same amount, it means that one with the 1 million cards, even if we can't quite ascertain whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, we know it's 5 times rarer and we know we're initially getting it at the same price point. So theoretically, it's more of a bargain, quote unquote, compared to the 5 million production one that's more abundant. The problem is we still have no context whether that's a good amount of cards. Should you have printed more? Should you have printed less? Way less? A little bit less? And that's the problem where I say, like, it's a cool idea to say, hey, we're going to give you this information. And I say, cool. What's the consumer going to do with that? Because you don't actually know whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's the same thing that happens a lot right now with PSA population reports. They'll say, this card has a huge population. And I say, well, it might be huge. Depends on the card, depends on the popularity of the situation, depends on the current price point, and it depends on what the popularity would be depending on. If everyone decides it's been printed in too much abundance, then the price drops. If the price drops, more people come back in the market, and then maybe it's appropriately priced and it reaches an equilibrium point just the same. Equilibrium will usually be reached no matter what if you allow enough time. Like I said, I have no moral objection to it, but it is interesting the idea that somehow having production run numbers is suddenly going to fix something when people still don't really have any real context for what a good, bad, or indifferent production number is. Like I said, is it high, is it low, or is it just right for the current market demand that we also can't calculate? Those are part of the reasons why I say that it's interesting. I would love to see if he actually decides to execute. I would love to see if he actually decides to go through with it. That would be very fascinating to me. But I still don't know what that's going to look like going forward into the future. A lot of that is just very interesting to me. It's a very cool hypothetical to kind of run through, but there are some questions that I would have about that. And if I was sitting in the room going with him, I would say, like, other than a marketing tactic, what is it you think you're accomplishing? Are you able to definitively say that this production run is low comparatively? Now, it is good in the sense, I do agree with him in the sense that having a very clear delineation between a lower end product that has a super high production run to make sure that it is available at Target, at Walmart, at retail outlets, to make sure, hey, look, man, we're printing 10 million of these. You know it's not rare. Like, we're very clear about this. It is not rare. Why are you trying to hoard all the blasters in the shelf? Like, what's the point? The market is not going to back you up on this. So knowing that right off the bat is going to help in a certain degree. But again, it goes back to whether, I guess, people are paying attention to that. Because one thing I know in the hobby, and if nothing else, I know that not everybody's paying close attention to it. Not everybody is listening to podcasts like this. No, I know you're not. I know not everybody's listening to mine, but even the biggest podcasts in the hobby, the biggest YouTube channels in the hobby are still niche. It's still a very small subset of people that are actually trying to educate themselves or at least listening to opinions on these various things. So the truth is, I can give you the production numbers on everything. Doesn't mean you're paying attention. It doesn't mean you know about them. It doesn't mean if you know about them if they're staring you in the face. Unless you're planning to put them on the side of the box. Other than that, I don't know how you would get it out to the average consumer, but certain people would certainly know. So I guess that would be an improvement over the current state, but I don't know how much that'll help the rank and file consumer. That said, it is a good idea to have a delineation between the different product levels. But one other thing I'll throw out there as well is that it's going to be tremendously interesting, and I'll get to that in the third point a little bit more, but it is going to be tremendously interesting to see what happens when you try to do the delineation between these different levels. You try to create that lower end product that's supposed to be more kid friendly, to be like a gateway drug to the hobby for the kids. We'll see what happens with that one. Like I said, I want to save some of that for the third point, but I just want to emphasize that there are some challenges that also come with trying to create that, entry level product. It's a great idea, and we do want to make sure that there is some product available for folks to be able to open and crack. They put folks that just want to collect, and folks that want to build sets, and folks that want to do that. But historically, there's always been some challenges with that. And we'll get to that a little bit more when we get to the third point. Okay, that said, let's move on to a second here little audio clip, and that's related to the idea of the whole Dutch auctions. Now, as opposed to what Panini does with its Dutch auctions, Josh Luber here is going to make a contrast to what he has done previously with Bowman X on the StockX platform. Basically a blind Dutch auction, which is a different style. And specifically in this clip, he also makes an emphasis on how that is a way to be able to potentially distribute certain products. He does make the distinction that he would prefer, that he doesn't intend to do it for every product. Again, everything we're talking about in this whole interview He's not committing to this. He's not saying definitively we're going to do this, but obviously it's on his mind and he's given it some thought. And I do think it's an interesting and unique way of doing it. And I do have a couple of thoughts about it, but this is probably going to be the section that I have the least amount of extra to add. But let's play the clip first, and then I'll come back and talk about a couple of things about it.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. It's one of my most favorite things and in passion. This is the continuing vision from day one at StockX through me leaving and why I'm in this industry. I think that using true market pricing, which can only be accomplished a couple ways, and my belief is the best way to do that is by using what's called a blind Dutch auction. What Panini uses is called a declining Dutch auction. Obviously, these are confusing terms that most people don't encounter on a daily basis. But in a blind Dutch auction, everybody pays the same price. And by the way, over 95% of the people end up paying a price less than what they bid. So even though that price ends up usually being much more than what the retail price would have been, because these are usually products that have high demand, so people want to buy this product, everybody wins. Everybody wins. They get it for less than what they bid or exactly what they bid, but they all pay the same price and you're buying the same asset at the exact same time. It's completely illogical for people to pay a different price for the same widget at the same moment. Panini's, declining Dutch auction, it's fun. There's an engagement level, I guess, but except for that last person, everybody kind of loses, right? Everybody got it. Everybody paid more than somebody else. Panini makes more money that way, frankly. I don't like, I'm just very against it. I think it's a really poor way to sell cards. And so that idea, the what we did, that the Bowman Chrome X release with StockX and Topps back then, that was a huge impetus for this entire move, for me to move into the trading card industry and do this. And we will absolutely use that method to sell some cards. There's no way that you sell all cards that way. There's no way that you sell all products that way. But again, to my earlier point, if you have a holistic distribution strategy across all different products, all different channels, then you can have very high demand premium products that are sold as a blind Dutch auction and are released at a fair market price, and it's fair for everybody. And then you have other products that are retail and they sit on the shelf and they're always $1 or they're always $10 or whatever it is. So it's an important part of the overall philosophy is to leverage blind Dutch auctions, which we call our IPO or initial product offering, to use those very strategically, probably across every single sport.
Okay, so to keep it quick, I do think it's very interesting to have the contrast between the two styles of Dutch auctions. I do agree with Josh Luber in the sense that it does make a lot more sense to use basically the blind Dutch auction format versus the declining. I'm not a big fan of the way Panini does their business. He's right. It does kind of screw over certain folks that were basically folks that had much stronger FOMO who end up having to pay a much higher price. Conceptually, real quick, for those that are not too familiar with it, the Panini format was that you would start off at this high price. And theoretically, you could just buy it now, basically right at that price. But as time goes by, the price would slowly decrease. And you could technically, lock in at different price points, but you would be committed to paying whatever that price point is. So that's the general idea. A blind Dutch auction kind of works the other way in terms of everybody kind of offering a bid. And what happens is, you've got a certain amount of supply available and it basically covers everybody. Whoever was willing to pay the most will still get it as long as there's enough supply. But what happens is the price that ends up being the quote unquote lowest that would still have secured one of those boxes or one of those items will then become the price that everybody pays. So the folks that were willing to pay more actually end up paying less. But the folks that were willing to pay less, if you were tire kicking and basically were willing to offer $1, you're getting nothing because, there would be people who bid more than you. But the person that was willing to pay $1 million a box, well, they won't have to pay $1 million a box, and you won't have to pay $1 million a box either. It'll be whatever the lowest price was that still covered the available supply, which is probably the fairest possible way. And it does get a lower price on average compared to the other format. But also at the same time, it also means that you're getting the price that people are willing to pay. You are ascertaining the market much better. So I do agree with him 100% on that regard. I do think it is an interesting method with which to distribute stuff. I think it's important that it did include the caveat that his intention is not to, put all products through that, because I don't think all products would work that way. For some premium products, I'm sure that it would work pretty well. And it would be kind of an interesting little game because I guess now I'm sure you could develop a bot that could try to do that, but it would be interesting. I think in certain ways it does prevent it a little bit because it's kind of dynamic pricing. It's not as simple as you kind of have to commit to a price. You don't really get to play the game of being just because you're first in line doesn't mean you get all the product. I think there is a period there. Again, you'd have to see how they would format it and what kind of a platform they would use for it. But in theory, technically everybody has a fair shake at giving it a go and committing to some price. And then if your price happens to be high enough to at least cover the minimum threshold, then congratulations, you get your allocation based on that threshold. For a higher end product, I could see that being very viable. For a lot of regular products, I don't think the consumer would appreciate that too much, especially having to go on a specific platform. But he does keep emphasizing that his intention is to have various formats and various distribution methods to be able to get things out to folks. So as long as that's maintained, I don't really see any harm in it. I think it's interesting and at least an attempt at some innovation. So I have no issue with it. But this is definitely one that I would put in for you folks in the comments. If you have any thoughts about that as far as this one's concerned. This was a little bit more in the weeds compared to some of the other thoughts and concepts here, but it is kind of an interesting one and one worth keeping an eye out on because that may become the future of certain types of products and types of distribution that they have. So now what I'd like to do is move to the last point. And the last point is the reason why I wanted to kind of bring back an idea from the first one about the transparency thing. And that is simply the idea that people say they want more hits, but do they really? And Josh Luber makes a good analogy about that. And at the same time, I also will come back around to the whole idea of the transparency thing and if that's going to work the way you think it is. And I'll kind of close the loop on it with a couple more thoughts here at the end, and then we'll wind this thing down.
I'm curious, the sneaker market, which you had so much experience in, you had this quote in your Trading Cards Are Cool Again article about how everybody in the sneaker market says they want Nike to produce more of their limited print run shoes, but nobody actually means it. Tell me that, and tell me how that applies to your philosophy around trading cards.
Yeah, I mean, this gets back to transparency and hits and parallels, right? To reference back to the select conversation. I'm going to get the numbers slightly off here, but there were something like 30, 31 or 32 Anthony Edwards 101s in select this year. And I think there were 17 or 18 Zion Williams 101s, right? So going from 1 year to the next, the number of 101s in that set more than doubled. That's crazy, right? And so sure, more people can pull a 1 of 1, and that's exciting and that's great. But the value of those cards starts to decline because there's too many out there. And so, well, what do you want? Do consumers say, hey, I put more 1 of 1s in there because I want to hit them? Well, not really. What they really want is they want to be one of the lucky ones to hit the really valuable 1 of 1, the logo man or the prism black, the ones that are really valuable. And unfortunately, like, to have them be very valuable, they have to be very scarce. So, this is the parallel issue across the board. Same thing with autographs and memorabilia hits, which is people say, or it would logically make sense that, hey, if we put more in there, then more people can hit them, and that's a good thing. It may not be, right? What people really want is to be the lucky ones to hit that 1 of 1, as opposed to hitting a 1 of 1 that is not worth anything.
Now, this one here, I'm not going to spend the most time on, but it does have the most interesting long-term implications. And it goes back to a discussion that I've had with a few hobby folks on the channel over a variety of time. And that is that as time has gone on, and I usually use jersey cards as the example for this, as time has gone on, the hit has taken on a variety of different elements, and there have been various attempts to do it. When for those of you who may not recall, right around 95, 96, it depends on the sport and whatever category it is, but I'll say 96, 97, I think, for hockey, if memory serves me correctly. The jersey card got introduced, and it was a couple of years later that the patch card got introduced in the hockey space, and then baseball had its own, and then football and basketball, and of course, I believe the first real memorabilia cards were, I believe, in motorsports. It might have been like a NASCAR card. Memory's a little fuzzy on that at this point, but it was in the 90s. It was around the mid 90s. But the point is that as these hits became prevalent, at first, you could print a pretty good amount of them, and they were still pretty rare. Because the production runs were so high. So that's why I say this one touches on the first topic a little bit as well. Production runs were so high that you were able to distribute them pretty openly over the entire print run, and they were tough to get. The early hockey jersey cards were 1 in 2,500 packs. And obviously, as time went on, that became, more and more common. Eventually, you had one jersey card per pack products and things like that. Same thing with autographs. Same thing with everything else. All hits eventually became more and more common until they lost some of their luster. Parallels existed. Parallels eventually became so common that they lost some of their luster. One of ones came into being. One of ones eventually became so common that they lost some of their luster. Not all of their luster, because one of ones can still be an interesting thing for a player collector, a team collector. But there's just using my specific example. As a Mike Modano collector, I've collected them over the years. I don't remember. I don't keep count. Tells you how closely I pay attention to it. I don't keep count how many one-on-ones I have, but I'm pretty confident I have over 40 or 50. And that includes printing plates. That includes other varieties of them, a variety of them. I don't get too excited about them anymore because honestly, there have been so many produced over the years now that other Modano collectors that I know have some. I have some. None of us will have all of them. And the thing is that the one of one actually indirectly, not completely, obviously, I'm living proof of that, but it did kind of kill the player collector because the completist became impossible. As soon as a one of one came into being, nobody could have everything. And the more abundant the one of ones became, then the less likely it was that you could have everything, because now you can have all the money in the world. And unless you buy me out and every other Modano collector out, you can never complete a full Modano collection with all the one of ones, because I have some and they have some, and you're going to need them all if you're going to actually be complete. That's beside the point. But the idea here is that every single novelty, every single insert variant that is attempted and tried eventually starts off as really rare and difficult to come by, and then eventually becomes more and more common until it loses some of the edge. It's like the drug that initially, gave you this crazy high on just a little bit, but eventually you keep having to up the doses. I know people don't like that analogy, but the truth is that's what it is. Eventually you have to keep upping the doses in order to get even an equivalent. But after a while, it's like you keep going and going, and now it's like the expectation going into a hobby box is you got to have hits. What are the hits? What hits are you getting? What parallels? What inserts? What insert parallels? Like, what are you getting? Without the hits, what are we talking about here? Who cares about base cards? And the reality was that the base card got devalued as time went on, or got debased, if you prefer that horrific pun. But the point is that as time went on, the base card lost value. These other hits became more prevalent, became more important, quote unquote. But the problem is, as they became quote unquote more important, they also became more common. And as they became more common, they became less important. The irony being, eventually you run into a problem where so where do you go now? And that's where some sets have slowly started trying to move it back into technology-based inserts and try to incorporate that in order to try to recapture some of that lightning in a bottle that we had once upon a time. But that notwithstanding, that also plays into the whole idea about the production numbers and some of these higher end products. And this has always been a challenge that I throw out there. And those of you who may have kids and everything may be able to relate to this better. And I'll throw it out to you if you have any comments or thoughts on this. My question to you would be, are you sure, knowing your kids, are you sure that they would be okay and accepting of a product that was very available? So say you could go to Walmart or Target or whatever and get blaster boxes of a pretty available product that was inexpensive. Let's say it's relatively inexpensive. That has a lot of base and very little in the way of crazy inserts or anything like that. You could open 100 blasters and not pull anything that's worth more than $5 or $10. I'm just using a hypothetical. Let's say they printed it enough so that there's always an abundant supply. You'd be able to finish a base set. You'd be able to maybe finish your team set or get some cards for your favorite player or whatever. How long would it be? And this is just, like I said, a hypothetical I put out there. How long do you think it would be before that entry-level base set would become insufficient? How long would it be before, if your kid has any collector friends in their, in their play group, in school, or whatever the case may be, when they realize that they're the ones buying the entry-level set while their friends are buying the quote-unquote regular level or even premium set because one of their parents happens to be rich? It's one of those things where it's a weird problem that is only a problem now because of the segmentation in the market. And I'm not proposing a solution here. Unfortunately, I don't have one. But it is an interesting thing because all I can do is refer back to my childhood when I started collecting in the early 90s, when I was opening up a box of 1991. So the first box I ever got when I was when I was at home, and my parents were willing to get me a box, and I asked for it. They got me a box of 1991 Topps baseball, which, if you know anything about it, was printed to the moon just like everything else. It was the 40th anniversary of Topps, and now we're on the 70th anniversary of Topps, and that makes me feel old. But nonetheless, the point is that was the 40th anniversary of Topps in 1991, and they had a lot of things going for it. And what happened was, I'd open the packs and open it, and I'd open it and look at, and I believe the Chipper Jones was one of the rookies in 1991 Topps baseball. I could be mistaken, but I think that's right. Anyway, the point is that they had these cards. I remember them very well. I remember opening the packs, but the pack and the boxes of Topps that I was opening, that was flagship, that was regular Topps. It was the same Topps that the quote unquote adults were opening. There was no difference in the packs and the boxes that I was opening as a kid, because in 1991, I was 8 years old. There is no difference in the packs and boxes that I was opening in 1991 and when I was opening 1991 Donruss. There was no difference in those packs and boxes that I was opening compared to what the quote-unquote adults were opening. And in 1991 Donruss, you had the Donruss Elite inserts. They were numbered to 10,000. The problem is you might have to open a couple of cases to pull one. It wasn't because 10,000 is rare. It is because it's rare over the course of a print run where each base card was printed in the millions. I had 15 Eddie Murray cards from 1991 Donruss. So trust me, collation wasn't great either. The point is that they printed tons of that stuff. So here's the question. Is it okay in this scenario that I just laid out? Do you think your kids are going to be okay with the idea of, yes, it's available. Yes, you can have packs. Yes, you can build a set in 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. Is it going to be okay? Are they going to be okay with the set? By the way, after you're done your set, the set's worth $5. I'm exaggerating for effect, but the point is that you know that the thing about printing it really high in order to make sure it's fully available is that the value won't be there. Now, as long as you're able to keep your kids away from the original sin of the hobby in terms of the quote unquote value, as long as they don't know that value is even a thing, you'll be fine. But the moment they come into encounter, wait a minute, there are some people who can open packs and pull a card that has value? Question mark. What is this? Why am I opening this garbage? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but my question is still the same. How long would it be before your kids would figure out, that the jig is up? Maybe they don't want it, because the different companies have tried this. Collector's Choice was originally a product designed to be kind of the entry-level, kid-friendly. Entry-level products have had a really hard time. And a lot of it is because, honestly, the potential, pulls out of it are not there. You can build a base set. Yes. That's very true. I remember UD Choice in the late 90s. It was a set I actually thought was pretty good. I thought it was pretty neat. Now, as it turned out, almost by accident, I don't think it was intentional on their part, but in UD Choice Hockey, 98, 99 UD Choice, they actually had, obviously, a ton of base cards. You could pull a lot of that. I remember opening some of it myself. I thought it was a good product for what it was. But the interesting pull was that you could pull the StarQuest cards, and they had 4 different levels of them. And the first 3 levels were pretty attainable. The red, I believe, was 1 per box. Like, I'm just going from memory right now, but the real pull, the real draw, and it was very difficult to pull, was the StarQuest Golds. So I'm just using hockey as an example, but basketball also had one of these. And the StarQuest Golds were numbered to 100. Okay, if I offer you a card out of 100 in today's product, that's all right. Not a big deal, but it's good. Well, at that time, they had 30 players. It was a 30 card set and 100 cards. So a print run of 3,000 cards. And that's out of innumerable number of boxes and packs and cases. So in reality, you might open a case or two and maybe pull 1 gold. So the reality was that, yes, it's out of 100, but it's actually extremely difficult to pull. I remember that when I found one of the StarQuest Golds from Mike Modano, it was like this. It was like the heavenly choir sang to me when it was time to go buy it. And I got lucky because I bought it before people lost their minds for that stuff later on. Try finding an equivalent. If you want to have some fun, go do some Google searches on, or some eBay searches on, comps for StarQuest Golds, especially in basketball for sure. But you'll see that those were really tough. But that was from an entry-level base product. That was a really low-end product. So I suppose you could try to do something like that today. As part of that segmentation strategy, have transparency in the sense of, hey, we're printing millions of these cards, millions and millions, stay away scalpers, leave us alone. But if one of your kids gets real lucky, a 1 in 10,000 pack pull or whatever the case may be, Could be this, could be the modern iteration of the StarQuest Gold. It could be that. So that's a possibility. That could be a way, an approach. And I think they do something similar to that with the Tim Hortons hockey cards here in Canada, where they're very cheap packs. They're designed pretty much for the kid market, but it is possible, even though the odds are long, it is possible to pull redemption cards for memorabilia. It is possible to pull redemption cards for autographs. So you can still get the big hit, even though, like I said, the odds are long. They're not in your favor, but it is possible. And I guess maybe that's your way around it. Yes, it's very difficult. You're going to get a lot of base. You'll get some inexpensive inserts, and you'll get some low-end parallels that won't be too crazy. But you can still build a set. You can build basically a master set of everything except for the redemptions and for the memorabilia and autographs therein. But if you happen to pull one, then it's an exciting moment still. It still has that big hit feel, because if you get one of those redemptions, or in the case of another product, hopefully it's pack pulled, you can get it in the pack. But if you get that thing, then it's still exciting. And that, I think, would be a good compromise in it. My point of this entire segment of the discussion is that it's just interesting to me. And then the last thing I'll leave you with on this idea is that, in the same vein, getting away from that low end, is that we've kind of become very dependent on the hits. That's been my overarching point in this last little segment, is that, so Josh Luber is bringing an interesting point to it, and he's correct, that we have become dependent on the hits, because that's really what he's saying. And the problem is, okay, so how do you go back now? How do you backtrack when you've conditioned the audience to expect a certain thing? Because now we're a victim of expectations. The expectation is that you get X number of hits per box. So now if you get less, it's actually disappointing. It actually feels like you didn't get value, because you didn't get value, because secondary market prices on a lot of this unopened product has gone up during this entire run up. So now it's actually become an even worse value. So how do we correct as a market? That's where that supply thing is going to get really interesting, and see how you mitigate. How do you figure that out? One test that'll come into play soon, and this will be the last example I'll use before I wrap this thing up, is that I've discussed on the live stream on my YouTube channel, because I'm Carlos' YouTube channel, that AEW has an upcoming release from Upper Deck. And they've decided to go strategically with their very first product with the strategy of withholding the autographs to a much tougher ratio. You're not guaranteed an autograph in every box, whereas a lot of an equivalent WWE product has an autograph or two in every box of like the standard Topps Chrome and stuff like that. And obviously in the higher end products, even, autographs all over the place. But the point is that by doing that, you do two things. It decreases the ROI, quote unquote, on the box, on the hobby box of AEW, but the anticipation has brought the hobby price to go up in secondary market, even though they haven't even released it yet and it's been delayed. But the secondary market has gone up on the AEW versus the MSRP. But at the same time, you can open a box and you're going to get some, cool looking inserts for sure, but you're probably not going to get an autograph, at least not in every box. So then the autographs, yes, will be worth more. But at the same time, you're going to open a lot of boxes that, if you pay higher secondary market prices, are going to be technically duds. And that's going to be a very interesting dynamic. Again, it's wrestling and it's more of a niche market. I get that. But my point is that, imagine if Josh Luber is suggesting that there's going to be some products that are going to try to pull back, the reins and some of that memorabilia and some of the autographs to try to restore some value to these inserts. But at the same time, it's the market is already kind of conditioned. So that reaction is going to be very interesting to me. Again, he's putting a lot of this stuff out there with the idea that he's trying to, I don't know if he's specifically trying to solicit feedback, but he's going to get it. And it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to it and if they end up actually following through on a lot of these concepts and ideas. But that's the reason why I have this incredibly long audio version, to talk about these very concepts and ideas. So there you go. Thank you to Josh Luber. Thank you to Sports Card Investor. Thank you to Jeff Wilson and the team for providing content based on their content, which is always the best way. Anyway, so that's it for me. I've already rambled on for long enough. Thank you for those of you that indulge me in this little, talking out loud session, kind of thinking through some of my thoughts and ideas on some of these things. But with all that said, I'm curious, especially if you're listening to this in the YouTube version, I'm very curious to see kind of what you think. There's a lot of room here to go in a lot of different areas and topics. I'm curious if you think about any of these, any of the clips from Josh Luber. What do you think about some of the points that I bring up in terms of that? Does your desire for transparency in production numbers, is that supersede everything else? Let's just get these production numbers. Let's find out what it is. Let's let the market figure it out. Or is it one of those things where maybe you don't want to know how the sausage is made? Either way is viable, but I'm just curious kind of your thoughts on that. Secondly, the Dutch auction versus the blind Dutch auctions, the whole Dutch auction thing, that may be the one that I expect most people will be least interested in. To me, it's kind of a fascinating thing, but I understand if it's not a big concern for folks. And the last one was the whole culture of hits, especially in unopened wax and things like that. Do you think they can pull back the curtain a little bit? Do you think they can kind of pull, turn back the clock as far as getting us weaned off of our addiction to hits in our product? Are we okay with a product that gives us a lot more bass and we don't get nearly as many hits, but maybe we slowly start to value the hits again? Is that a thing we can do? Or has that genie already been let out of the bottle? Are we already too far down the path that we can't turn back now? That's kind of the main thought that I have with that. And that's kind of the question that I would pose over to you. And the other piece, for those of you that may have kids and maybe have kids who may be interested in getting in the hobby, do you think do you think that entry level products will work for them? Is that a case where maybe it'll work for a little while and then eventually they become aware of the horrific value of things and then all of a sudden it's not good enough anymore? Or is it a case where maybe the focus on the base and set building and all that may be something that could keep them entertained? Is that something that you think could work if it's structured well and available in abundance so that you don't have to worry about fighting people in the aisles at Walmart or Target and you can go get your little blaster box, 15, 20 bucks or 30 bucks or whatever they are now, and you're able to get your box and open some packs and there you go and start working on your set? Is that something you think is viable still in 2021, end of 2021, going into 2022 and beyond? So those would be kind of the questions that I would leave open to you. Feel free to take them in whatever direction you want to go to. If you're listening to the audio version, I do appreciate it. It is available on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. It's also available on the Because I'm Carlos YouTube channel. I include a link to the actual quote unquote video/audio in every single description of every single episode. Again, if you are on the YouTube version, if you could like the video, I would really appreciate that. If you subscribe to the channel, I'd appreciate that. And as we head towards the end of the year, if you do find any value in any of these and want to share the videos along to other people, that helps a ton. Appreciate it. Thanks very much. We'll catch you in the next one.